Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Enabling Tomorrow. My name is Tim Metz, I'm your host today, and we are here with Uche Onuora, the founder and CEO of HITCH. He's originally from Nigeria, currently based in Canada, studied at the University of Waterloo in Canada, had several IT roles at tech companies, consultancy, before starting his own company. So we're soon going to talk with you, Uche, and hear your whole story. But first, I want to introduce my co-host, Miura. Hi, Miura. Can you quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, team. Hi, Uche. So my name is Miura. I joined KaiOS last year, and I look after partnerships in Africa for KaiOS with a focus on East Africa.
All right. Great to have you also on the show. Uche, now over to you. Can you further introduce yourself and tell us how you got to where you are today, starting at the start of your career?
Okay. Thank you so much. So my name is Uche Onuora. I'm originally from Nigeria. Sorry, I hope can you hear me well?
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, sorry, I went for a protest march in Kitchener. They had a Black Lives protest march.
Okay.
Black Lives Matter. Yeah, there was a protest, so we went out, and I stayed 2 hours outdoors yelling.
Wow.
So my voice is a bit this, but yeah. So I'm originally from Nigeria, and I got into tech essentially because I've always had an interest in things and fixing things and how things work and all of that, but. Essentially, my journey began when a friend of mine, who at the time was living in Chicago, and I would always talk about how we could do that. I was living in Baltimore, Maryland at the time. He was in Chicago, and we would always talk because we had a shared passion for Nigeria and development of Nigeria. He had just finished a role at McKinsey and then moved to from South Africa to the US, and so we would always talk about how we could use technology for developmental impact. And it was one of those calls actually that we came up with the idea to say, hey, maybe what Nigeria needs specifically is a cluster of technological activity, kind of like what you have in 128 in Boston, the Research Triangle, North Carolina, Silicon Valley, all the clusters around the world, and which had started becoming even more evident by this time in India. The Indian success story had started, Bangalore, Hyderabad, all these stories, Chennai, Tamil Nadu, all these stories about how a government can take direct action in engendering technology development to happen had kind of showed. And so we didn't know anyone, we just had ideas, and we sat down, wrote, we kind of collaborated and put together research on a document that spelled out how Nigeria, which had a capital city in Abuja. So Abuja is kind of like Washington, D.C., Lagos is like New York. So that's the way to explain it. So Lagos is the commercial nerve center, and Abuja is the capital. Now, funny enough, and ironically, I had never been to Abuja by this time. I grew up in Enugu. So Enugu is in the eastern part of the country. That's where I was born. That's where I was raised. And then, of course, I would visit Lagos often, and then eventually spent some time in Lagos before I left for the U.S. So my perception of Lagos was that it was chaotic and it was overpopulated. And so Abuja was this pristine, brand new city that had been built in the center of Nigeria, just probably maybe about less than 30 years before. So it was built, I think, about 75 was when it started, groundbreaking. But the government didn't move till like the early 90s, 91. And so it was a relatively new city with brand new infrastructure. And so we were thinking maybe there's an opportunity to create some kind of developmental impact with technology here. And so the idea to build a technology cluster center there took root. And so did some research, dug into it, worked on it full time, and then published a quite extensive report it online. At the time, it was just like, let's publish something. Maybe someone somewhere is going to see this.
So when is this? So, like, which year are we now?
So this was 2003. 2003 by this time.
Okay.
So I was in Baltimore at this time.
Yeah.
And so it was ironic that we took that position because there was also the opportunity that the new minister of Abuja at the time, who's like the mayor, but he's not elected, he's appointed by the president, was someone who was known to be reform-minded and big ideas kind of person. But we didn't know him, and we didn't know how to reach him. So like, you know what, we'll write it and we're going to put it online. And so this is what, 2003, very few Nigerians were really online like that. But anyway, by some stroke of luck, it actually got into the hands of the minister at the time. And so on one of his trips to the US at the time, he asked to meet with us. We met with him. I said, hey, this is the idea we have. And he said, well, I'll share a secret with you. I had a concept, an idea to do a technology village and cluster here because guess what? In the master plan for the original city, there should have actually been a technology cluster. It just was never done. Government never took the moves to get it done. And so now I want to actually get that done. And so would you put together a project report for how that could happen? And so drawing a lot on the extensive research we had done for cases in India, 3 different cities, Bangalore, Andhra Pradesh, and Hyderabad and Chennai. We kind of put together something for Nigeria, talking about how the government could do it in phases and how this could happen, and then submitted that. So that basically led to me going back to Nigeria, and then getting an opportunity to work with the minister now in more of an advisory consulting role, where the different projects I worked on. So apart from the technology village, which itself was planned, it was a $400 million project the government was supposed to put in place. It's still not completed now. The government changed shortly after that, and even though the foundation had been built and they started, there's actually a cluster. There's a university there now. It's like a major center for stuff, but it's not gotten to its full potential because of the political follow through. But essentially, that introduced me to the world of how technology can really have a direct developmental impact. It led me to going back to Nigeria, going to Abuja for the first time. And then once I landed in Nigeria, this was 2004, I realized that the infrastructure technologically just wasn't there. Things I took for granted, going online, having access to all this information had become, they started happening in Nigeria, but it was still very tough. By this time, this is even before the whole idea of the mobile internet didn't even exist. So the telcos were not interested in data. They were sending voice and they were sending minutes and they were sending SMS, and that's really what it was. So if you wanted to go online, you either went to what's called a cyber cafe, like somewhere where you go in and log and pay to connect. And even then, depending on where you went, it wasn't typically very good. And so when you now think about all the gamut of different services and products that could be delivered online, that wasn't even an option in the Nigerian context. And so looking at it from that standpoint, I started thinking about, well, so what can be done? How do we solve this problem? And so shortly after that, it launched me on a trajectory towards trying to solve access to information, access to knowledge, trying to figure out both the infrastructure layer and then even the pipes and the services and different things that you need to crystallize to make it happen. And so I started working actively in that space, consulting, proposing projects, trying to do different things. There was a lot of advocacy, proposing to different arms of government, trying to get stuff done. I worked on a bunch of other projects as well, but it was always back to technology, this hunger to use technology for development. So I would say for the greatest part of my career, that has been my interest. A lot of the self-learning and the teaching beyond what I learned in school was all towards how do I apply this knowledge to bridging this gap. And then shortly after I left the role with the minister, I started essentially what became my entrepreneurial career, which was basically trying to launch a platform which could bring access to all of those things in an affordable way. By this time, the mobile internet had kind of just started. There were now a lot more opportunities opening up, but it still wasn't at the point where I feel it wasn't at the inflection point, if you want to put it that way. I think I was one of the first people in Nigeria at the time to go on the mobile internet because I had friends who worked there. And so when the new initiative was being tested out, like they had modems where you would put in a SIM card and test it out and you could go online. I was one of the first people to get that. I can remember it was quite expensive, but it was quite a thrill for me to finally be able to do that and then see how that led to all the other things that then happened. So by the time the handsets came, BlackBerry and the iPhone in 2007, it was quite interesting. But then at some point, I realized that the challenge of access to information and access to knowledge wasn't something that one company could do. Like, even if you had the ideas and solutions, it was an ecosystem thing. And so beyond me thinking about it from the standpoint of what I could do as one entrepreneur, I started thinking about it more from a system standpoint, like what is it, how is it possible to do these types of things? And so I was quite excited when initiatives from Google and Facebook had started, like the Project Loon connectivity projects from Google, and then Facebook Aquila with the drones and all of those things started. There was even a company called OneWeb that recently went bust that was trying to use low satellites. Yeah, so I was completely enmeshed in that whole thing. I'm delighted to see now what Elon Musk is doing with Starlink. I'm excited, at the potential for what that can do. But then also what was happening on the ground with the telcos now realizing data was increasingly more important, and then building our infrastructure to support it, going from, just the GPRS to Edge to 3G, 4G LTE, and now everything beyond. And so always been in the space. And interested in what was going on. Before I moved back to Nigeria from the US, I actually spent time in Canada for a while on my way back. I loved the country, loved the fact that it was kind of similar to the US in a lot of ways, but quite different in the sense that it was very, very, very how should I put it, community driven. There was a lot of social infrastructure and safety nets. And so I had always thought, well, I'm moving back to Nigeria. If I'm ever going to live abroad again, it's going to be Canada. And it was just something I said. I never thought about it again. My wife had gotten referred to a treatment center facility here for childhood early development and special needs development, one of the biggest ones in the region. That's actually why we moved. When I now got here, and when I now realized I had to be here, and I was facing almost like, if you want to put it like, I was being despondent about, my goodness, I have to start from scratch in a new country. My wife then said to me, hey, by the way, you're always talking about tech and you've always been about tech. Do you realize that this is one of the largest and biggest tech clusters in Canada? One of the most successful ones. I was like, yeah, you're just saying that to make me feel good. She's like, no, for real. This is the home of BlackBerry. I was like, are you kidding me? She's like, yeah. I was like, yeah, I knew BlackBerry was a Canadian company, but I always assumed it was Montreal for some reason. I don't know why. I just thought it was Montreal. But it turned out, yeah, she was right. And so I Googled it. For the first time, I went online, found out about the University of Waterloo, what was going on with entrepreneurship, technology, BlackBerry, everything that had happening in entrepreneurship. It was at that point I said, okay, you know what? I think I need to rethink this. I will go back to school. Over on the drive over, the idea for what HITCH has become crystallized in the sense that I had always been solving the infrastructure challenge to access to information with a bigger infrastructure base, whereas I had to rethink it to say, how do I bring it to a smaller concept that could grow organically to become something big, essentially. And so the idea for what HITCH became was what I took into the program. So I did a Master's of Business, Entrepreneurship and Technology at the University of Waterloo. And it's essentially 1 year intensive Master's. It's like an MBA style thing, but you don't have a thesis or you don't do any research. You work on a business, your business. You don't work on other people's business. Although you do that during the program, the primary product is to work on your business and to develop it and make progress over that 1 year. And so I went into the program with a lot of high hopes, a lot of optimism. I had a checklist. I had my shopping list. My shopping list was 1, I was going to find a technical co-founder who would help me try to bring this to market. 2, I was going to go back, get a degree, get some real business grounding with the tools and skill sets that I needed to take my entrepreneurial journey further. And then 3, also just be plugged into an ecosystem that was very vibrant and very created a lot of opportunity. And so all of those things happened. So from day 1, I went in, I met my co-founder, Steve, who happened to be in the program, looking for business experience and opportunities. And so we hit it off from day 1 when we talked about the projects we were working on. And he was the one who kind of galvanized me and pushed me to say, hey, let's go beyond the theory. Let's start building stuff. Let's start figuring out the technology. And so the concept was essentially building out a footprint, some kind of hardware that could host content locally and deliver it over Wi-Fi, essentially. So that was the concept for what HITCH was. The focus on video was because when I got here, a lot of the stuff that my son's therapists were using to support him was video. And he responded very well to educational videos for his own therapy. And so I said, well, imagine if educational videos could then be used by learners and educators in Nigeria at scale, what would that look like? And so that's actually what then led to HITCH and what HITCH has become. Initially, we had tried to do education from the standpoint of a vocation. So we had looked at educating farmers in rural areas to be able to do business better for their farms, to learn better agricultural practices, almost like extension services. But then we quickly realized that there was an additional hurdle. One, because they were in rural areas. Two, because there wasn't enough interest in terms of actually making that possible. But on the education side, generally, there was a lot more need, there was a greater need, and there was a lot more direct evidence of how education could be helped using access to world-class resources. So the concept of using world-class educational resources and making it accessible to a market that was previously cut off from it really, really resonated with us. And so the idea at the core is essentially targeting non-consumption, targeting people who are underprivileged, people who are in low-income environments, but still need access to educational material, not just for education's sake, because that's the other thing that you learn coming from an emerging economy, is that you actually do get to the point where you understand that people need stuff, not because it's readily available to them, but because it can help them transition. So part of what for us made sense is that in the context of Africa, generally, education is not just education, it's connection to economic opportunity. So if you were to say, what are the jobs to be done? The job to be done for education is economic opportunity in Africa, because we have a significant challenge with unemployment and underemployment, and we have a significant challenge within the educational system itself, being able to provide skills and prepare people for a real world environment. And so those two things colliding was actually what now galvanized us to go into HITCH. And so today we have launched HITCH, and that's where we are. But in a nutshell, roundabout way, that is the backdrop to how I came to Canada and how I came to be in Waterloo.
Yeah. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing. I think it's very interesting, and I think, coming from the edtech world myself, I'm as I was saying, a former edtech founder. I think one of the questions I really wanted to ask you is, first of all, what do you think are the challenges of implementing e-learning solutions on the continent today? As you've said, educations and training and capacity building, all of these things are needed for the youth, especially it's the youngest continent. But what do you think are the key challenges in implementing those solutions, and how do you guys at HITCH particularly answer those challenges?
Yeah. So I think there are a number of things there. So there's I think infrastructurally, just in terms of access to the materials is one of them. And when I say access to the materials, I'm not just talking about, for example, the affordability of the internet connection or connectivity to connect to online systems. I'm not just talking about the availability even. So even if I can afford it, is it available? So I'll give you an example in an African context. If MTN and all the different telcos in Nigeria today made their entire mobile internet free to the entire country, the infrastructure in Nigeria can't support it. Like if everybody tried to connect at the same time, if there wasn't any cost consideration, even if somebody, Bill Gates, decides to write, I'm going to write the checks to pay for everybody to go online in Nigeria, we don't even have the infrastructure to do it. So that's what it also affects it, right? And then you even have to think about things like adoption. So the devices, right? Okay, so what devices are people going to use to connect to it? So those are accessibility issues. So that's like affordability, availability, which leads to accessibility. So now, apart from the access to the devices, apart from access to connectivity and all of that, there's also the power issue. So a lot of people in Nigeria use power cuts. So even if I have a device, even if I have the internet, even if everything is working and I don't have power at home, at some point my device is going to run out of juice. I need to recharge it. So access to power is also another a major issue. And then the issue is now the context. How do I get access to the contextual resources? So right now in Nigeria, you can go online, you can access platforms like Khan Academy, and these are fantastic platforms, right? But contextually to what people need to be learning and what they need from that context, there's not a lot of high digital literacy to be using those platforms. So you need platforms that have contextualized content in a way that overcomes that digital literacy, right? So that's one of them. And I think the final piece of the puzzle is how do you just keep them engaged? How do you get people coming back and using platforms and all of that? Yeah. So from that standpoint, all of those things come together to create challenges that will affect anyone trying to do an edtech play in Nigeria or Africa. Beyond that, the bigger one is, even if you were able to surmount all of these problems as a technology company, the realization that we can't create silos. We can't have siloed people duplicating the same thing. So everybody doing the same thing. So think of it this way as a stack. If you had to launch an edtech in Africa, in the US today, you don't have to think about connectivity and a lot of things. Yeah, there's some areas that don't have it, but for the most part, at mass market, you don't have to worry about that. Everybody has internet at home. Everybody, you don't need to worry about that. In Nigeria and Africa and other places, the percentage of people that does have that is so small that if you create silos of edtech companies, everybody's competing for the same red ocean. It's the same customers, but the main group of people who really need it are completely left out of it. And so interoperability between the edtech solutions is actually critical. So being able, it's almost like, a friend of mine, another edtech founder in Africa, called it an API economy for edtech in Africa. So which means that if someone has a grading solution, if someone has a test-taking platform, if someone has an exam preparation platform, whatever those different things are, they should be able to talk to each other. So that if we leverage all the infrastructure and we solve all those other things I talked about, then the applications being able to interoperate means that we can become better at what it is that we do, and then we can simply integrate. And that has a bigger and larger developmental impact. So that's what has guided our own thinking at HITCH, essentially.
And do you, we're already at the official time, but let's keep going because the story is good. So when you said like the part about the content, you said it needs to be contextualized. Does it mean you create your own content, or it means you how do you get the right content?
There you go. So I think there are two things here, right? There's context around what am I trying to learn, and then there's context around things like the language of instruction and the speaker's accents and some other things. So for the most part, when you're looking at STEM subjects, for example, in edtech, math is math, science is science, right? They're universal, right? So when you're looking at universal subjects, it's basically the same across the board. But what's interesting is that there's already a ton of fantastic content that's already being created. Platforms like Khan Academy, TED Ed, Fuse School, Mindset Africa are doing great, incredible work with content. That's not, we don't have a content problem, if you want to put it that way. What you have is a discovery problem, a content discovery problem to the context. So what do I mean by context? It means that if I'm in grade 1 and I'm studying English, what am I supposed to know according to what does the curriculum say I need to know, right? So the context of the curriculum is what guides the subject, the content I should be looking at, right? I know people will go out and complain and say, well, this curriculum is not good, this one is not good, that one is not good. But overall, if you look at the context, if you look at the curriculum for example, in Canada, because in Canada, each province has its own curriculum. If you look at the Common Core in the US, if you look at the IGS, CSE, if you look at the UK, curriculums are not the problem. That's not what the issue is. I know people complain about that, but that's really not the issue. It comes down to how does the student, how does the teacher interact with the curriculum and translate the learning outcomes and performance objectives from that curriculum to what they need to know. So back to the question you're asking, Tim. The content is there. What we want to do is to curate the content. What you want to do is to add the filter to the content that creates the context through which the learner and even the teacher is accessing it. So what do I mean? At the end of the day, someone in New Zealand can create the best video on a particular topic or particular segment, right? What you want to do is to make sure that that video can get to anybody around the world who needs to use it. You can also make different types of technological things where you can actually translate that video. If it's an issue of a language barrier, you can always put filters on it to make sure that, okay, you can put it in that language. But then this also means that there's also opportunities for local content creators. So creators in the local environment, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in wherever, being able to be given the tools to interpret and teach according to their own context, for instance. So they now also have the tools. So it's two ways. There's content from abroad and different places, and it doesn't matter. There's also local content. What you want to do is to make sure that it's standard. The standard is world-class. So just because content is local doesn't mean it should be crappy, and vice versa, right? And so for us, focusing on the most effective way, and I know people think, oh, I can just get in front of a camera and I can teach. No, there's tons of research demonstrating that there's a way that an educational video should be made, which makes it an effective tool for teaching. So it's not just any educational video, right? And so that's what I mean by the content. So the content supply can come from anywhere. It's now making sure that the quality is good enough. It's making sure that it addresses the learning outcomes and performance objectives from a local curriculum standpoint, even if it's a co-curricular subject as well.
And is it then somebody in the HITCH team who selects the videos and puts it together, or can other people like educators also use the platform to put together a selection?
Exactly. So that's essentially what it is. So we started, because this is a thesis we've had and we kind of jump-started, but what we're now doing is, and we're actually working with one of the most, I guess, inspirational teacher organizations, if you want to call it that way, or leadership organizations in Nigeria. It's called Teach for Nigeria. Teach for Nigeria is an affiliate of Teach for All. And so Teach for All is this massive network of young people passionate who are trained to become leaders and teachers in their local environments. And they go to the lowest underserved schools to go and teach. So these are people who come out of university, passionate, driven, educated, smart, and then they put through a 2-year program where they become teachers, and then they go into teaching in these places. And so we're working with them to also build our tools that we have already used internally. Our own education experts have used internally. We're now providing those tools to them, and we're actually hoping to launch that to the wider community to be able to do this from anywhere, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Miura, do you have another question?
Yeah, so HITCH is primarily based on video, right? Which
yes.
You know, in terms of usage on the continent, it's imagine it's pretty bandwidth heavy. How do you make it friendly and accessible for the end users?
Yeah, fantastic. So the two ways. So we have what we call a synchronized platform. So we have an online platform, and then we also have an offline platform. So the offline platform is this piece of hardware where we have all the videos and all of that living on this device. So it has storage, it has a battery built into a rechargeable battery, it has a 3G modem, so it can synchronize with the online platform. So the content can be updated. Mm-hmm. Engagement data and analytics about what is going on is all collected and sent back up. If the internet goes down, it's fine. If you are running an update, because once it comes back up, it can continue from there, keep updating itself. And so the idea is that this now takes care of the bandwidth issue from a communal standpoint. So once you have one of these devices in schools, and we have these in about 25 schools in Nigeria, the idea is this now sits in an ICT lab, it's accessible to students and teachers, and they can just come with any Wi-Fi enabled device and access it. So that's the missing piece of the puzzle. And every place we went, we were always asked about the access devices. Now, in schools that are more privileged, if you want to put it that way, access to devices isn't an issue. But in schools where you have a private school, so I'll give you an example. In Nigeria specifically, in Africa, 25% of schools are private. So that means that 1 out of every 4 kids is in a private school. Now, the problem is private school isn't what you think of when you're thinking about expensive privileged schools. That's probably maybe 1% of the market. The rest of the schools are middle income, and then most of them are actually low fee pay price. That's what they're called. They're low fee paying. You're paying maybe $5 in a year for kids to go to school, something like that, or even less, right? And so that's where you have great need. For the government schools, in a lot of instances, it's actually worse. Like those are the real underprivileged schools. And so what attracted us, and I know I was supposed to talk about this, but just what you guys are doing at KaiOS is phenomenal. That's what excited us, because KaiOS going and focusing on next billion users, on people who ordinarily would not have an access device, changes the conversation completely. You go from talking about getting a $200 laptop or some other device or like a $100 tablet into the hands of a kid who might not even have access to electricity to recharge it or do anything to it, to then having a low power consumption device that's affordable and that can actually help the student learn. And so that's the last missing piece of the puzzle that I think the opportunity is presented with here.
That's great. And I would like to. I mean, we have a few minutes left. You clearly have like to set big goals and have big ideas. I mean, you talked about the computer village in Nigeria, of course, HITCH itself. What is the big goal you have for the next few years for HITCH or for yourself? Like what's coming up?
Yeah. So I think what's going on now is, like I said, so education and with everything that has been presented by COVID. So before this, it had kind of been tough. Everywhere we would go with HITCH, people would say, yeah, this is great. It almost seemed like a nice to have. But because of COVID and everything that has happened, and people now see that digital education, online education is critical, it now becomes, oh, wow, what can we do to make this even more readily available? And so we've also been thinking through all of those things. For our next plans, we're just focused on driving access to as many people as possible. So what do? We partner with different organizations and different people who have an interest in serving the customers that we have an interest in serving, which is the underserved and low-income users who right now, if you want to put it in a sense, are non-consumption markets, right? There's no market there. It's like a new market. We have to basically create that market. And so partnerships with people like iOS and HITCH for Nigeria, even UNICEF in Nigeria, we just I've signed an MOU with them. It's targeted at doing this. We also are one of the 12 EdTech fellows in Africa that have been selected as part of the MasterCard Foundation's first cohort for EdTech support in Africa, focused on it. So we're also working with MasterCard Foundation to get this done. So Thank you. Actually, our thesis around connecting education to employment opportunity was based on extensive research that MasterCard Foundation actually had done. And so we had come across it before, so it just kind of aligned when the call came out. But essentially, our goal is going forward is, listen, whether you're in school, whether you're out of school, whether you're in whatever environment you find yourself, putting educational, vocational resources in your hands that can connect you to either a professional career or to a vocational one, if that's the route you want to go, or to an entrepreneurial one. That's the big goal for HITCH, essentially. And so everything that we do, the technologies, the partnerships, the rollouts, everything we're executing is around making sure that that process of discovery and access to that information, we remove as many barriers as possible to get that done.
That's great. And what does it take? Because in the big plan, I think, because currently you're in Nigeria, right? What does it take? What does it take to get it to other countries in Africa and even in other regions? What are the big barriers for that?
So I think the biggest one, so just to start with, the biggest one is the curriculum. But the advantage also is that Nigeria shares the same curriculum with Ghana, Gambia, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. So 5 Anglophone countries in West Africa have the same curriculum. So that means that the roadmap to expand straight away is into those countries. Also, because we're using a combination with online, offline, even in places where we don't have the offline, we can actually deliver the online. And we're talking to, looking at partnerships with telcos and other players to be able to make access to that platform available. We're also using a lot of compression, because you talked about video bandwidth. We're using a lot of compression and mobile optimization to make sure that the videos are quality enough for people to watch, but they're not very high bandwidth. They're not 4K videos, essentially, is also another focus. And we're doing a lot of things around making sure we remove those barriers. So the roadmap would be there. We're also looking at markets that are quite exciting, where there's already a lot of stuff going on in EdTech, like Kenya, looking at Rwanda. So for us, one of the things that we are doing and working on is actually creating an opportunity for a curriculum to be digitized, and it doesn't matter what the curriculum is, it just becomes a filter. That's essentially what it is for us. And so being able to expand to those different countries will be through the lens of what the curriculum provides for the context of the content. So being able to support Kenya, Rwanda, and different, it just becomes, what is the input, what is the curriculum, right? And then we can then provide a solution that expands in that way. So right now, working with all the partners that we have, that's kind of what we're focused on. And we also focused on a lot of data analytics, kind of driving what we're doing. So beyond the hypothesis and things that we're talking about, beyond connecting theoretical learning to practical, applied, market-ready skills, industry-driven skills, we're also collecting a lot of the data to demonstrate why this is the right way to do it. And again, we see interoperability as what we want to do. So we're willing to work with content partners, different partners from anywhere. It doesn't matter, different edtech companies working in different spaces who have an interest in what we're doing is something that we really want to do. I mean, for example, I'd love to shout out one of the companies that we're working with called Siavula. So Siavula is this fantastic edtech company out of South Africa that has done a lot of exam prep content and testing and all that. So we're integrating, working on trying to integrate our platforms with theirs to provide that. So for us, it's kind of like this API economy for EdTech is really what I think can unlock and change the face of what is available ultimately to the beneficiaries.
That's a great vision.
That's
and
awesome.
It's a great story. I mean, we could keep talking for a very long time.
Definitely.
I think I'm glad you again. But thanks so much, Uche, for sharing your and Miora, thanks also for joining us. If people want to read more or learn more, where should they follow you or where should they go?
Oh yeah, so we're on Twitter, so it's at HITCH just at HITCH one word. But you can just go to the website, it's hitch.video. So just type in HITCH, HITCH, like the shirt, .video, VIDEO, hitch.video, and then you can find access to our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We're also on LinkedIn as well, but everything is on the website. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thanks again.
Great.
Thanks so much for joining us and for sharing your story. And thanks everybody for watching. And see you next time at the next edition of Enabling Tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you,
Tim. Thank you, Mira. Okay, Mira. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Okay.